Welcome back, everyone, to NeuroAlchemy, where science meets soul and where healing becomes multidimensional, intuitive, and profoundly possible. I'm Dr. Sarah Young. Here on NeuroAlchemy, we define every term as if you're hearing it for the very first time because clarity creates safety, and safety opens the door to new healing possibilities. Today, I'm joined by Terri Kozlowski, Indigenous author, spiritual mentor, and emotional resilience coach whose healing journey began in profound childhood trauma. Her work bridges somatic grounding, subconscious reframing, Indigenous spiritual wisdom, and nervous system regulation. Terri supports sensitive, neurodivergent, and trauma-impacted individuals in moving from hypervigilance into presence, reconnecting with intuition, and reclaiming their authentic voice. Before we begin, I'd love to start with a gentle arrival check-in. How are you arriving today, Terri, either physically, emotionally, or energetically as you come into this conversation with us today?
Excitement. I'm very excited to be here, Dr. Sarah. I think that we're going to have a fabulous conversation that is very grounding and very much soulful.
Wonderful. Before we go deeper into your story, I'd love to start by grounding a few core concepts and terms that we'll be returning to together throughout our show today. For our listeners, how would you define the fear body, what that means, and how it shows up in everyday life?
For most people, it's what I call the egoic voice. It is that voice that is in your head that tells you you should be afraid for lots of different reasons. And all of them are very triggering from your past. And therefore, it can show up as, for example, for me, it showed up as a very upset stomach on a continuous regular basis. It showed up as me shaking. Especially I would put my hand up and you could see my hand visibly shaking because that for me was a signal that my body was saying, you're in fear mode. You're reacting negatively to something and we need to calm yourself down. So the fear body shows up in our bodies with shaking, with that egoic voice that is telling us to be afraid, even if our situation has changed dramatically since our trauma occurred. It also shows up in the fact that our ego thinks that we are still the age of our trauma. So for me, that showed up when I was 11. So my ego always thought I was an 11-year-old little girl. Therefore, all of its fears for me didn't change when I became 20, 30, or 40. It stayed the same. And this is where I talk about we need to upgrade our software. And our brains need to be updated. Our egoic mind needs to be updated to understand that as an 11-year-old, what I can do is very different than what I can do at 20 or 30 or 40.
That sounds very empowering when we realize that we have a lot more control over the trajectory of our lives, regardless of what's happened to us up until now. How would you define nervous system regulation in simple human language?
The easiest way to explain it is that we have control over our bodies. And therefore, when we get scared, when we become fearful, when we become anxious, we can take 3D and ground ourselves. We can go outside and walk on the ground with bare feet and ground ourselves. We can get quiet and listen to our heartbeat and our breath and allow ourselves to reground and regroup so that the egoic mind gets a little quieter.
And what about trauma beyond the event itself, how it lives in the body and patterns itself?
Trauma is information. It is not a lifestyle. And that means that instead we don't take our identity from our trauma. And a lot of people get stuck in their victimhood. And I know I got stuck in my victimhood for about 15 years because two things. It empowered me in certain ways. And more importantly, when I told somebody I was a victim, they left me alone. And that was something my egoic mind wanted me to everybody to leave me alone because if I was left alone, I was not put into places that would be triggering. So when we decide that we are going to release our victimhood and become survivors, that mindset shift is very much where we leave the lifestyle of being a victim, of having trauma be our lifestyle, and decide that we are using that trauma as information to move forward in our life.
It really sounds like you're giving us an open invitation to start to look at what is running you, what is running us, right?
Absolutely.
Where are we making our choices from, and how might we make new choices today? And what about somatic presence? What it actually feels like when someone begins returning to their body?
Presence is one of those things that really can't be explained in words because it really is how you feel in the moment. And most people right now, you and I are having a soulful conversation. We are connecting, and therefore, all is right in our world. And even if something triggered us in this conversation, we know we're in a safe place because we are fully present, and in the present moment, things can't harm us. And that is where people get stuck, is that they live in the past and therefore are depressed. I believe that depression is fear of the past, and you focus on the past and that becomes your lifestyle. That is where that trauma is lifestyle instead of information. I lived there for a period of time, not very long, but I lived there for a period of time. When I realized that I was focusing on my past, I did the exact opposite. I did a whole 180 and became very anxious about my future in every way, sense, and form. So I lived for 5 years in depression and then about 10 years in full anxiety mode. And in that, the one thing that happens is you ever live in the present moment. And guess what? You can't heal in the past or in the future. You can only heal in the present moment. Therefore, becoming present and realizing that when you are fully present, the things in your body settle down. My stomach that was always clenched up and hurting, and I didn't listen to my body for a very long time. I was in my 80s before I actually listened to my body, and that's only because it decided to explode, and literally I had a ruptured appendix, and I still didn't listen and ended up with peritonitis because I did not listen to my body, and my body was telling me over and over and over again, you need to be present. You need to focus on your healing journey.
Do you think that this society plays a role in that? That we are constantly either chasing something down the road or looking at something from before. And not only just that, we're kind of conditioned as well to kind of ignore our body, right? To focus on other things, other people. Hush, hush, ignore that. And it could be so detrimental. But even though that's so detrimental, I'm not hearing that from you. I'm hearing that, hey, this is an open invitation again. It's an opportunity for you to come home to yourself and to claim the moment that you're in. And that's really a beautiful thing. How might you define intuition, especially for people who've learned not to trust those inner signals?
For women, it's really hard because we are so conditioned. And if we look at, I'm 57, so people my age were raised where we were taught as children to be seen and not heard. So there is the first time that, you have to start stuffing. And my trauma specifically made me stuff all my emotions because I had to physically deal with the situations. And I had a younger sister with me who I was making sure I was taking care of her first. So anything that I thought was important, I smushed down. When we start to unravel that, and again, that is where all my emotions went. That's why I had the ruptured appendix, because I wasn't listening to my body. I wasn't listening to my intuition. Your intuition is the whispers of your soul. Your soul is meant to guide you through this life in a way that only your soul knows how to. It doesn't matter what everybody else in the world is saying is the best thing for you. If your soul says it's not, it is not. And for women, when we start to pay attention and listen to that gut instinct, listen to that intuition, the only way to do it is to get really quiet. And the reason we have to get quiet is because our soul whispers to us. So it's very quiet. Whereas the egoic mind yells and screams and is very boisterous and in our face. So we have to learn to quiet ourselves, quiet the mind. This is where things like meditation and prayer come into play, where we can get quiet and spend time in nature and get quiet. When you start listening to the birds in the morning and when you're outside having your coffee, it is very calming. And then all of a sudden, you start hearing that intuition's talking to you. You start hearing the whispers of your soul. And in those moments is when you truly realize that you always had the power, you are always whole. You were never broken. And you realize that everything that you know you are to be, you still are.
I love that. And I feel like we're always in a process of becoming if we choose to look at it that way. We're not broken. We might have gone through some things, we might have some trauma under our belt, but we can always use that as a transformation place, right? And you're right, our body is always talking to us. Our lives are always talking to us, and it is up to us to really come present and to listen. Now
We
that yeah, yeah.
we have I don't want to dismiss anybody who says, "But I feel broken," because I agree, you do feel broken. And the reason you feel broken is because you put on masks and armor. And those masks and armor are hiding you. And in that, your true light cannot shine through. So you have these rays of light poking through your mask and armor. That is your true authentic self. And that is why you feel broken. You cannot be your full authentic self, and you will feel broken until you take off the mask and armor and allow your true brilliance and your true authenticity to shine forth.
But it's always there, isn't it? Always
Hmm.
there underneath. Now that we've grounded some shared language, I'd love to turn toward you. Can you share a little bit about your own healing journey and the experiences that shape the work that you do today?
Absolutely. So I come from a very traumatic childhood. I am the product of divorced parents. My mother was an alcoholic and drug addict, and my dad was the first man in the state of Maryland to get custody of my sister and I, two young girls. That was unheard of in the 70s. Found out that my mother actually didn't show up to the hearing. So that is my first abandonment issue. When my mother swore to my dad that she was dealing with her alcoholism and wanted to see us. My dad allowed us to go visit her for the summer. First 2 weeks were fabulous, and then she started drinking. And what we didn't know at that point was that she was a drug addict. And one night after one of her parties, my sister and I went to bed, and I woke up with three men raping me. And my mother was standing in the corner watching so she could get drugs. And so she sold my innocence so that she could have something to suppress her emotions and to suppress all her pain and guilt. And although that is not a justifiable reason for her to cause pain, I do understand where she was in her healing journey, which she wasn't healing. She was stuffing and suppressing. And when we look back at our parents, when we look back at our grandparents, they did not have the tools. They did not have the awareness. They did not have, this was not talked about in those generations. And for me, what happened to me happened in the early 80s. And when Oprah Winfrey came out on her show and said that she had been sexually abused as a child, that was the first person on the planet that I knew that it happened to as well. So there was a very lonely place in the idea that I was the only one this ever happened to. So one of the things that I learned in the healing journey was keeping the secret is bad. And the reason it's bad is because we feel ashamed of what happened to us. And that shame has been put upon us because whoever the abusers were in our life, whether it was sexual, verbal, physical, whoever the abusers are in our life, they always tell us, shh, you have to keep the secret. And that causes us to feel shame. And when we speak the truth, when we come and say, this happened to me, nobody puts shame upon us. The shame is released. And the difference between shame and guilt is that guilt is something that we do wrong and we know it was wrong. And therefore, that's a feedback loop for us to correct ourselves. And that comes from our soulful self saying that you did wrong. You need to apologize. You need to make this right. But shame, you can never make right because it's always external placed upon you. So, therefore, the only way to rid the shame is to tell the secret because the secret isn't about you, it's about the abusers.
I can relate to so much of your story.
I'm sorry.
But, and I feel, and tell me if you feel this way, as traumatic as a lot of the things that I've gone through are, in many ways, Terry, for me, I felt like it's allowed me to become a better version of myself because I understand things that many other people maybe feel alone, like you were saying how alone you felt. And it's allowed me to reach to those places, reach to those people that feel like they're forgotten or they're lost or so on and so forth. From your perspective, how does trauma wire the nervous system for hypervigilance, and what does it look like to gently unwind these patterns over time?
So the hypervigilance comes from the fact that our egoic mind has a job to do, and its job is to protect us. And when we fight against it doing that, it causes dis-ease in the body. And for us, we need to realize that the ego is trying to do its job, and its job is to protect us. Even now, I can still be triggered because that's the job of the ego. However, as you go and move through the healing journey, it is your job to remind your ego that you've healed from certain things. And so now you thank the ego. Thank you. So, for example, the three abusers were three Hispanic men. And it's always amazing how the universe puts ways for us to heal gently. I ended up working for a company that was full of Hispanic men. So I learned that I shouldn't judge three men, that shouldn't judge the entire Hispanic male population by three men, that I saw that Hispanic men can be respectful and empathetic and compassionate and friendly and kind. And therefore, I was able to say to my ego, when it saw three Hispanic men approaching me, thank you, ego. I'm I'm okay now. I'm safe. Whereas it used to be when an ego was triggered, I ended up turning, walking on the other side of the sidewalk, getting out of the way. But now I know that I don't have to be afraid and scared every time I see Hispanic men. But it's my job to remind my ego that I've healed that and that I have other ways to deal with my fears and other ways to overcome and be whole again from that perspective and not allow that trauma to be that lifestyle, that it is information. And I'm letting my ego know that I'm thanking it for the information, but it's no longer necessary.
Yeah, I really, there's absolutely a purpose, there's absolutely a purpose in that. And it can be very different, that initial recognition of this isn't the same thing, this isn't that, right? Those Hispanic men equal this trauma, but realizing like we're not there anymore, right? This isn't that time anymore. This is a new moment. So every moment is a new blossoming or a new opportunity for that if we allow that.
Yes, another example I can give on that, because that was very trauma specific, but my mother was an alcoholic and she was a very mean alcoholic. And when she was drunk, I was the target. So I got blamed for the divorce she and my dad had. I got blamed for her alcoholism. I got blamed for her drug addiction. And I was 11, I took on that blame. I took on that responsibility. It wasn't until I was in my late teens that I realized all of her problems happened before I was ever born. So therefore, it wasn't my fault. And but because she was an alcoholic, being around people who drank terrified me because I made the assumption that all drunks were like my mother. And guess what? That's not true. A lot of people drink socially and become very happy go lucky individuals. And a lot of people drink quite responsibly. I was in a biker gang and we would ride the motorcycle and then we would stop and spend the night at the hotel and walk to a restaurant, and everybody would start drinking. We go back to the hotel rooms and everybody was drinking, and it was a party-like atmosphere, and people were very responsible because nobody was driving, and everybody would go back to their own rooms and everybody was fine. Even if they woke up and not feeling well, that was their responsibility, and they took that on. So, although I had an angst with the alcohol, I had an angst with the drinking, I had to teach my ego that if I really felt uncomfortable, I could leave the situation, and that these people were not angry. They were not focusing any negativity towards me. And therefore, my angst with the alcohol really had to be very specific to my mother. So I put in boundaries to make sure that my mother's drunkenness did not harm me anymore.
Yeah, and I guess we always do have that. Again, I keep coming back to opportunity, right? But we have the opportunity to look at the things that are running us and to rewrite the story of our lives or how we choose to live them. You speak about the ego fear loop. How do people begin to recognize when fear is driving their reactions, their identity, or their decision making?
The easiest way I can describe it is I believe that there are basically two emotions: fear and love. And if we look at like something like anger, that is fear reacting. If we look at something like empathy and kindness, that's love in action. So if you boil it down to those two, if you are reacting, which means that you don't pause and think before you do something, 9.9% of the time, it's a fear based reaction. If, however, you pause and make sure that there's a pause of about 3 seconds, you are reconnecting with your soul, and then you can respond from a place of love. And these are things that are all awareness based. And the way you become aware tends to be more, am I pausing before I take any action or I speak another comment, especially in a heated situation? Am I pausing and listening to what that person is telling me? Because most of the time, people think about what they're going to say and not actually hear the person complete their sentence.
Let's talk a bit about how Indigenous perspectives on grounding, intuition, and embodied truth support that journey back into safety after trauma.
So, in my book, Raven Transcending Fear, it's my memoir, and my mother is Native American. She is Athabascan, and her clan is the Raven clan. And although she always told me I was Native American, we never really discussed what that meant. And when I started my healing journey, I did a lot of research on ravens in particular because of the clan association. And the raven, if you look throughout history and its mythology, it shows up at death. So it always gets a bad rap thanks to Edgar Allan Poe. But the reality is the reason it shows up at death is because it is there to transform death into new life. It is to take that death and take it to the next level. And the reality is Raven is the figure of transformation. And when I realized that I belonged to a clan of transformationalists, I realized that that was unique to me and that it wasn't something that was everybody had access to. But then as I realized anybody can become part of the Raven clan, just like my sacred totem animal is the snake. And again, the snake is a very transformational animal as well because it's always shedding its skin, always letting go of those things that no longer serve. And for most of my healing process, realizing that I have the power to change the direction of my life by choosing in every moment, does this align with where I want to go? Or or am I repeating a negative pattern that doesn't serve me anymore? And interestingly enough, 2025 was the year of the snake, where we were supposed to shed all kinds of new things. And 2026 is the year of the horse, which is really about being wild and free and moving forward at a very fast pace towards those things that align with our lives. And we need to realize that from an Indigenous perspective, we're always transforming from moment to moment. And that in grounding ourselves every morning within nature, listening to our soulful selves, and realizing that our best medicine is already within us. And we just have to take our power back in order to transform it.
What feels missing in modern healing spaces when the body and ancestral wisdom aren't included?
It's very imbalanced. I understand the purpose of medicine, and there is good natural medicine, and then there is chemical based medicine. And the reality is, when you put chemical upon chemical upon chemical in your body and don't understand where that chemical came from, it causes more disease in the body because the body doesn't know how to handle it. So let's just do something simple like a known toxin, which we find in our laundry detergents. Most laundry detergents have neurotoxins in them and people don't realize it. And yet you are wearing that next to your skin. Therefore, your skin is absorbing those toxins into your system. The way your body handles that is that it tries to strip it away and takes it to the liver and tries to get rid of it. And sometimes the body can do that, and sometimes it doesn't know, and it stores it because it doesn't know what to do with it. Well, native medicines, real medicine from native plants, and have a natural way. Your body knows what to do with real sugar. It knows what to do with honey. It doesn't know what to do with corn syrup. And when we look at things from that perspective, you realize that the body has great wisdom if we actually pay attention to it. And indigenous tribes throughout the world have had this knowledge that they are freely willing to give if people want to listen to it. But our society is so focused on the quick fix, the pills, the injections, whatever it is, that is the fastest way, but it's not necessarily the healthy way. It's not necessarily the way that the body can actually really heal from the inside out.
And you teach inner parenting and subconscious reframing as transformational tools. What does that process look like in real life for someone that's healing fear-driven patterns?
So for me, it really comes down to looking at my story, my trauma story, and reframing it in a way that becomes empowering for me. Yes, I had a lot of really bad things happen to me. However, all those bad things I transmuted into things that can help others. I can now be a bridge for other people to take them across faster instead of going through the depths of hell that I went through. Come with me, take my hand, I'll walk you through the process. It'll be faster for you. You can take off the mask and armor, and you reframe those things that terrify you. And what I mean by that is Hispanic men are not bad. And I learned that Hispanic men are compassionate people. I learned that through the biker gang, that being around people who drink, being around people who get drunk, doesn't have to be a terrifying experience. And this is that learning curve. This is that mindset shift that we make as we are adults, when we can learn through having a growth mindset and understanding that more information can help us than staying stuck and looking at the past.
What shifts do you notice when people begin responding from safety rather than survival?
Survival mode is really about making it to the next day. And most people understand survival mode. Thriving, however, is very, very different, because now you are looking at ways to be the best version of yourself and moving through life from a perspective of that all things are possible. And that when you think that something is impossible, you really are putting a lid on your potential, and your potential is limitless, and the possibilities are endless. And therefore, you need to realize that as a soul, your soul has a never ending capacity for life. And that is how you are supposed to move forward.
For listeners who want something tangible to work with, I'd like to use an opportunity to have you to suggest an awareness practice or some type of simple practice that you can invite them to explore over the next week to support nervous system safety and reconnection to their body. What would you recommend?
It's a twofold process. The first part is really naming what you're feeling. And this is so hard, especially for women, because we get told from an early age to suppress what we're feeling. So when you are feeling something, and for a long time, I didn't even know what to name these feelings. I just felt something, but because I had been stuffing so long and I hadn't been conversing with anybody about how I was feeling, I didn't understand that a lot of times when we feel something, we have to name it. So, whatever you're feeling, figure out what it is and name it. And you can do simplistic things. If you're feeling frustrated and you don't know, you feel like you're angry instead, just call it anger. And then realize that when you name what it is, sit with it and feel it. You don't have to sit for it for hours. Sit with it for a couple seconds and feel the anger. And then ask yourself, why are you angry? And a lot of times you move to the next level, which is, oh, I'm not angry. I'm really just frustrated with the situation. And guess what? You just now raised your vibrational frequency from that of anger to frustration, and you've changed how you feel. And that's the other thing, is that people don't realize that feelings are not meant to stay. You're meant to feel it and release it and to move on to the next thing. So you may not be able to go from anger to happiness, but you can go from anger to frustration, and you've raised your vibrational frequency in the process, which is always the higher vibrational frequency you have, the closer you get to love, because love is the highest vibrational frequency. And then once you name and feel it, and then try to make it feel a little bit better, move that vibrational frequency, the next thing you can do is the breath work, because breath work is so incredibly grounding. And it's a simple practice. You breathe in for a count of 5, hold for a count of 5, release for a count of 5. Do that 5 times, and you reset your autonomic nervous system. And in that reset, your body automatically lowers its blood pressure, lowers its breathing rate. You feel calmer. And for a lot of people with anxiety, that simple breath work exercise really can recenter them. And once you become recentered, and this doesn't have to take 30 minutes, this can take under 3 minutes, you can then respond from a place of love in whatever the situation is around you.
As we begin to close, what do you most hope that our listeners understand about the nervous system, their emotional reactions, as well as their innate capacity for healing?
That they have the power. The Wizard of Oz was one of my favorite stories growing up, and it's because at the end, Dorothy realizes she always had the power with her. And we always have the power within us. Just because whatever trauma occurred in our lives stunts that doesn't mean that it's not there. And we just have to start taking off the masks and armor and realize that the power is within us. Just like the butterflies on your wall behind you, it's a transformational process. You know, as trauma happens to people, they cocoon up, and because it's safe. And I call that the thorny blanket. And when we start the healing process and we start taking the blanket off, we didn't realize it was thorny in the first place. We just knew whatever this pain was, we understood it. We knew where it came from. And despite the fact that pain is pain, this was a pain that we understood and were comfortable with. And when we start taking off the thorny blanket, when we start that transformational process, when we start that healing journey, what we don't realize is it's a different kind of pain. Healing is a painful process. If you look at when you cut yourself and it's bleeding a lot and you're putting pressure on it, and then it stops bleeding and then it starts to scab over, but you start picking at that scab. Well, that's what the thorny blanket does when you take the blanket off, is that you realize you have these scab places, you have these oozing places that you didn't realize, and some wonderful person like Dr. Sarah comes along and is patting you on the shoulder, and it hurts because she's patting on a wound that is oozing, and you don't know what to do with that. And you throw that thorny blanket back on because that is comfortable. You know what that is. But the healing journey is just that. It is dealing with the pains that you didn't know. What Dr. Sarah did when she was tapping and, rubbing on your shoulder was a trigger. And that is a sign that, okay, something there needs to be healed, needs to be looked at. And we have to realize that the healing process is really about dealing with those triggers that we have in life. And I don't want to say it's easy to deal with the big ones, but you know what the big ones are. Hispanic men were big ones for me. Alcohol were big ones for me. But what I didn't know was that as I moved through the healing process, that some of these other strange little things that became bothersome, I was reacting to them. I had somebody tell me that, what had happened to me happened 20 years ago. I should be over it by now. That bothered me. And the reason it bothered me had really nothing to do, I did not believe what the person was saying, but the reason it bothered me was because I thought, you know what? That person's right. Shouldn't I be over this by now? And the reality is, there are layers to our healing, and we need to understand that, there's healing layers just like there's chakra layers. And when we deal with whatever our major wound is, we have to start dealing with the other ones as well. And what I didn't realize for me was that my number one wound wasn't the sexual trauma. It was the abandonment issues that I had with my mother. And to the point where I was unknowingly pushing everybody in my life away so that they wouldn't leave me. And I didn't learn that until literally the day my son was thrown on my chest when he was born. Because when I looked down on him, I looked at him and thought, he's going to leave me. Not, I've been blessed with this healthy baby boy, but that he was going to leave me. And that is when I realized, I have a big wound here that I need to deal with. And it's taking me decades to deal with. And he's now in his 50s. And I know that my final test will be when my husband passes, because that will be when I know that he didn't leave me. That is just the natural course of life. And for me, that is my final exam. And I know that. And how I respond to that is going to show me where my greatest growth has occurred.
So triggers can be doorways to healing.
Absolutely.
Terri, thank you so much for this grounded and expansive conversation and for the wisdom that you bring into the world. Everyone, I will get Terri's links and how to reach her, and I promise to put those in our show notes. Thank you to everyone listening to this episode of NeuroAlchemy, where nervous system, intuition, and multidimensional healing meet. If something you heard today was helpful for you, or you think it could support a friend or a family member, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share this episode. It truly helps these conversations reach the people who need to hear them the most. Until next time, take gentle care of your mind, your body, and your inner world. Bye for now.